So welcome everyone. There's a lot of people joining the line. We're just going to give it one more minute for folks to join and we'll get started. Thank you. So welcome everyone. I think we will go ahead and get started. I can see that a lot of folks have joined the webinar. This is Harmony Hayes, the Director of Programs for Grantmakers Concerned with Immigrants and Refugees. And along with the Center for Migration Studies, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar. Just a few things to note as you see your screen. We will be placing everybody on mute during the presentation. However, we will unmute people for the question and answer portion. However, if you have questions or comments that you'd like to pose during the presentations while you're on mute, you can put those in the chat box, which are at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. And that's a good way to just flag things for the presenters to pick back up on during the Q&A section. So please feel free to use that chat box. And then if everyone could please, even though you are being placed on mute, if you could mute yourselves as well to just be sure that there's no background noise that will interfere with the presentation, as well as if you're putting your line on hold, be sure to mute yourself because the music could come through if we unmute people for the question portion. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Tara Magner, who's going to get us started and moderate this webinar. So take it away, Tara.
Thank you, Harmony, and many thanks to GSER for helping organize this webinar, and to Center for Migration Studies for presenting their new data tools to all of us to help us better understand the number and characteristics of the unauthorized population within the U.S. I want to welcome everyone on the call. We have a wonderful mix of funders from around the country, from immigration foundations, community foundations, legal aid, health, education, etc. So it's a very rich and diverse group, and we want to thank each of you for taking time to join us. I will quickly review our agenda, which is to have our colleagues from Center for Migration Studies describe to us what they're calling the Democratizing Data Project, to explain to us how they have identified estimates of the undocumented population through some new research methodologies, and then to talk about some of the relevant trends for policymaking, in particular with regard to the deferred action programs, deferred action for childhood arrivals, and deferred action for parents of Americans. And we'll take a break for questions at that point. And then we will have, again, the CMS team will walk us through how each of you can use these data tools. They're very simple and uncomplicated ways of searching on the web to learn more about the undocumented population in particular regions or geographic areas. And we certainly encourage you all to educate your grantees and other colleagues about these tools as they do their work. So just a couple more seconds on context to explain how MacArthur Foundation became involved in this work. As the MacArthur Foundation and others were looking ahead in 2012 and 2013 toward the possibility of a new law, ideally, or an executive action related to the undocumented population, we engaged in a conversation with Center for Migration Studies, which was trying to address the weakness in the information available to all of us, and that weakness being that it, to that point, had been very difficult to derive estimates of the undocumented population at the sub-state level. At that point, what we had were mainly estimates at the state level, at the national level, and then for the states with the largest immigrant populations. But it was very difficult, for example, for an NGO providing legal services or English as a second language services to say how many undocumented individuals might there be in this city or in this county or in this area of our state. What are their characteristics, and how can we compare those characteristics against the services that we wish to provide and the needs of that immigrant population. And so Don Kerwin will get into greater detail about this, but CMS embarked on a project with Robert Warren to start to derive these much more granular estimates and characteristics, and what is the product of that journey and that research project is what we will see today. And what we hope is that these findings can be used as tools by all of you and all of your grantees as you serve this population, and in particular with regard to planning for implementation of the 2 deferred action programs. So with that, I will introduce our speakers from Center for Migration Studies. As I think most of you know, the Center for Migration Studies is an educational institute and think tank. It just celebrated its 50th year of work and is both a think tank, a publisher of scholarly journals, a publisher of policy articles, and a very active contributor to the work of improving the state of migration and the experience of migrants in the United States. And then I will briefly introduce our 3 speakers and then turn it over to Don to launch into the presentation. Donald Kerwin is Executive Director of the Center for Migration Studies, and I think known to many of us for prior work with Migration Policy Institute and Catholic Legal Immigration Network prior to taking the helm at CMS about 3-4 years ago. Robert Warren is a Senior Visiting Fellow to the Center for Migration Studies, and for many, many years was the head of INS Statistics, looking at these populations over a great many years. And Rachel Reyes is the Communications Coordinator for Center for Migration Studies. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Don. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Tara, and thanks to GSER and for all of you for being with us. I think Tara is correct to call this work a process and a journey. It really has been. We'll be speaking mostly today about a new web tool that allows users to compile their own detailed reports on the unauthorized on a state and a sub-state level down to the census areas of roughly 100,000 persons, which are known as PUMAs, or public use microdata areas. The web tool resulted from a longer, larger, ongoing process of engagement on the unauthorized with academics, researchers, government officials, and NGOs, and this all started in the fall of 2013 when we organized a conference with Bob Warren, and Bob has done this, did all of the seminal work on estimating the unauthorized. It was a 2-day meeting which linked 2 communities around implementation of legalization programs, whether administrative or legislative programs. We didn't know at that point what they'd be. And the 2 communities that rarely get together actually, and I hadn't ever been in a meeting like this myself, were what we call data users, that is the federal, state, and local officials and the NGOs and the CBOs that would be central to successful implementation of a program. And then on the other hand, the researchers and academics who studied the unauthorized and whose work could help to craft a program and to craft the response to it as well. So on the user side, we had familiar players there. We had New York City's Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs and the National Conference of State Legislatures and Department of Homeland Security officials and leading NGOs and many others, including participants from the funding community. And on the researcher side, we had academics and representatives from Pew, Brookings, Congressional Research Service, MPI, and many others as well. The agenda was pretty straightforward. The data users identified what information and research they needed to do their jobs well. And the researchers and academics identified what they were working on and whether they might be able to respond to user needs. And the main need that was identified over the course of 2 days was for current, accurate, exhaustive, accessible, and geographic specific information on the unauthorized. So let me go through that again. Current as possible, as accurate as possible, detailed, accessible, and geographic specific information. And the meeting then led to a very involved and open process with academics and researchers to develop new estimates on the unauthorized, and with data users on what the exact data was that they needed. And finally, once we had the estimates in hand, we partnered with Indiana University's Business Research Center to make the data accessible to the public without putting unauthorized people at risk or providing data that involved such small samples of the unauthorized that it would be useless to people. Because our process was open and inclusive and very careful, I might say, it took a while, but we're very pleased with the results. What's available via the web tool, which we're going to go over mostly today, is only a fraction of the data that we have. And the next phase of the project will be to use the microdata, which undergirds the web tool in ways that benefit the community. And we're going to discuss that, some possible uses of it at the end of the webinar. However, just for now, we think that the possibilities are broad and almost limitless. So let me just finish this introduction by putting the web tool in the context of other work with the unauthorized. We've been focused on research, and we see this as part and parcel of this, on research that speaks to what government officials and NGOs can productively do to assist the unauthorized now. And this work has taken the form of different events, different working group meetings, papers, and studies. One of our projects, the person survey, which we did with Professor Tom Wong with Clinic and with the National Immigrant Justice Center, found that 14% of those screened for DACA were potentially eligible for another permanent immigration benefit. I believe that the percentage of the unauthorized overall with potential relief is much higher, since the DACA screenings were not always intensive and because they involved a younger population. We also found through that person survey that 56% of the larger group of unauthorized persons screened during normal intake processes by charitable immigration programs were potentially eligible for a permanent immigration benefit or relief. However, there's obviously some selection involved in who signs up for a screening in a legal office, so we didn't really highlight that finding, but it's an interesting finding nonetheless. We also organized an event that looked beyond the immigration context at best practices in promoting high participation rates by immigrants in government programs, whether healthcare programs, voting, benefit programs, or whatever. And we worked extensively with Roberto Suro on the potential of states and localities to regularize the lives of the unauthorized and what he called an era of new immigration federalism. And I'd say in recent months we've been heavily engaged with the SERI process, which is doing really terrific work as well. So we feel that we're very much in midstream on a lot of important work, but the web tool is an important, in fact, it's a key step along the way, and we're hoping that it's going to benefit the field into perpetuity. Let me stop there with the introduction and now turn it to Bob Warren, who's just been a terrific person to work with on this project, to discuss how the estimates were derived. Bob?
Okay, thank you, Don. Before I describe our estimates, I'd like to tell you what's unique and important about these particular estimates. In the 1980s, we learned that a high percentage of unauthorized residents are counted in censuses and surveys. That was important information that allowed us to predict how many would come forward for the IRCA, Immigration Reform and Control Act, the legalization program in the late 1980s. It also allowed us to estimate the total unauthorized population, which you often hear on TV or wherever, that it's now about 11 million. The problem with those estimates is that the methodology gave us a total number, but as Tara said, it gave no information about their characteristics and no information below the state level. These new estimates overcome the problems with that methodology. They are more current, they provide detailed information about the population, and they're available for small geographic areas. Looking at the next slide, the sources of data. To make these estimates, we use public use files from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey. It's an annual survey. It's a very large survey that covers approximately 1% of the U.S. population. If you remember the 1980 census, the 2000 census, they used to ask a question. Every sixth household would get a really long form. After 2000, they did away with the long form, and now they use this. They do this survey every year to get all of that kind of detailed information. So the survey provides detailed data for geographic areas all the way down to, as Don said, to Pumas, areas that have 100,000 people or more. The questions from the survey that are important to us are birthplace, or country of birth, year of immigration, and citizenship status. That is, have they become U.S. citizens? These estimates were derived from the part of the survey, from the 19.9 million non-citizens who arrived from 1982 to 2010. And I put this is in bold because this is the heart of the estimation procedure, because this essentially includes all of the unauthorized immigrants. They're non-citizens who arrived after 1981. And very quickly, the reason I'm using 1982 is that if they arrived before 1982, they had every opportunity to legalize under the IRCA legalization program in the late 80s. Or they've been in the country for 30 years and they've had the opportunity to become legal or to leave the country. To give you the broadest overview of the methodology, what we did was we examined every individual response to the survey, which covers basically about 3 million people. We used the techniques that I'll describe to sort out who the unauthorized residents are. And we were successful in more than 90% of the time. On the next slide, privacy respondents, I would summarize this slide by just saying that we made every effort to protect the privacy of respondents and to make sure that no one could be identified. And secondly, we give users a lot of information about how the estimates were made and how to use them. The first assurance of privacy is that we use public use files from the Census Bureau. Before they release these files, they're required by law to make sure that privacy is protected. They do a number of interesting statistical techniques to make sure that that happens. I don't have time to describe those here. But that's important, that they put this information out for public use, and they make sure that privacy is the number one concern. The estimates are based on a 1% sample, and we show them in fairly broad categories. Years, periods of entry, age categories, and so forth. And you'll see in the data tool that we don't show estimates for any country that has fewer than 1,000 estimated unauthorized residents. One other thing to keep in mind, too, is that there are 3 times as many legally resident foreign-born than there are unauthorized. So in any area, it's likely that there are considerably more legally resident foreign-born than there are unauthorized. In terms of the users, we point out that the estimates are subject to sampling variability, and we let them know the kinds of adjustments we've made, including an adjustment for undercount. And we tell them that the estimates, as Don said, less than a few thousand should be used with caution. On the next slide, pardon me, there's a pie chart, and it has a gray area and a green area. And again, we're talking about the 19.9 million non-citizens who entered after 1981. That's the entire pie chart. Now, from the estimates, the type of estimates that I described before, we know that about 10.85 million of that total are unauthorized, which leaves 9.05 million who are legal. Unfortunately, the Census Bureau does not lay out the data like this. There's just one large pot of 19.9 million who entered since 1981. Our strategy was to examine all the survey data and identify as many legal residents as we could in the data and subtract them, leaving mostly unauthorized residents. If we were totally successful, the green part of this pie would go away and we would be left with just unauthorized residents. So we did this process of trying to identify and subtract legal residents by a process that we call logical edits, and which means that we used information from the survey to pick out people, non-citizens who were likely to be legal residents. And the next slide, the logical edits, we show some of the categories. As I said, if you entered before 1982, we consider you to be likely a legal resident. If you're a legal non-immigrant, that is a student or a temporary worker or other people who would be counted in the survey and their families, we identified them through the fact that they were students or the type of jobs that temporary workers were doing. We considered them to be legal residents. Most of the immediate relatives of adult U.S. citizens we considered to be legal residents. If people were receiving Social Security, Medicare, and other benefits that are restricted to legal residents, we considered them to be legal residents. In the case of Medicaid, if they were under 18, we didn't automatically assume them to be legal because children in many states can receive Medicaid. And the other exception was mothers who had children within the past year. They would also be eligible for Medicaid. If the immigrants were from refugee countries, that is, we define refugee countries as those countries where they had twice as many refugees in a year than the number of new legal permanent residents who arrived in that year. We would consider those immigrants to be legal residents. If they worked for the U.S. government or actually the government at any level, or were in the armed forces or employed by the armed forces, or if they were veterans, we consider them to be legal residents. Now, the last category here, work in legal occupations. By legal occupation, we mean that these people work in occupations that are likely to be held by legal residents. In the next slide, the quote legal occupations, there's a large list of them there. The main thing to notice about this list is that they were selected because they often require a background check or because they require some kind of advanced certification. So we went through and looked at every survey, every questionnaire that there was, and we picked out all of those that we consider to be working in occupations where they would likely be legal, and we put those over into the legal category. Now, so of the 19.9 million non-citizens that we started out with, we identified 7.3 million as being legal residents based on these logical edits. That left us with 12.6 million who were mostly unauthorized. And if we turn over to the slide, the summary of methodology, I'll finish up this section by just going through the major steps in methodology. And 3 of them we've covered already. So the first step A is the 19.9 million. Sorry. The 19.9 million from the ACS Step B is 7.3 million that we identified with the logical edits, and that gives us Step C, which is 12.6 million. The next step, in Step D, we selected 10.85 million to be in our database using country-by-country estimates that we derived separately, and that's described in detail in our paper. So now at this point, with Step D, we now have microdata that adds up to 10.85 million. The last step was to adjust those estimates for undercount, and we did that by the most recent immigrants were adjusted for undercount by about 12 or 13%, and that percent dropped steadily all the way back to those who had been here for 15 years or more. They got an undercount rate of about 1%. It turns out that the overall adjustment for undercount was about 7.5%. At this point, we have 11.725 million unauthorized residents, and our estimate is not just a number. We have detailed characteristics down to the small geographic areas. Now, looking at the characteristics slide, from a demographer's point of view, here are some important characteristics of the CMS database. First, confidentiality and non-disclosure are strictly maintained. These estimates fit well with other accepted estimates, all of the other estimates that Pew and DHS and others have made. These estimates are right in line with those estimates. The estimates and characteristics are available down to the PUMA level. The data are readily accessible to all users through our web tool. The 2013 estimates are the most recent available, and I think that they're the most recent estimates that anybody's made. Our estimates for 2014, and including all of the detailed data, will be available before the end of the year, probably November, but no later than December. So with that, I think I'll just turn the presentation back to Don.
Thank you, Bob. So Bob and I should say, took a pause from the work on the web tool and other work that we were doing to examine the policy implications of the new estimates on the unauthorized. And we wrote a paper on this that was in our new public policy journal called the Journal on Migration and Human Security, and we thought that it might be interesting for you to go over some of those policy relevant trends. So this is the very first one. Obviously, these are our estimates on DAPA and DACA. We have a lot of information on DACA and DAPA potential beneficiaries. Our overall numbers are similar to what other numbers are out there. We wanted to bring your attention to a couple of things. One, the high degree of access to computers and the internet among this population. I mean, that obviously has relevance for outreach to these populations, has relevance to the kind of public education that's done, the ability of applicants even to assist and file their own cases. But also notice that these populations have long tenure in the U.S., like the unauthorized overall, and this came as something of a surprise to me, that more than half of them have been here for 15 years or more. In other words, they entered before 2000. These next series of slides, what they do is they speak to the need for federal reform, and they make the case, I think, that now is the perfect time for federal reform. So this slide shows that the unauthorized population has decreased since 2008, and it's more or less stabilized at this point, around 11 million. This is a very fascinating slide because, of course, Mexico is the state that contributes the most to the U.S. unauthorized population. Still more than 50% of the unauthorized are from Mexico. However, what it shows is that new arrivals into the unauthorized population from Mexico have basically fallen off a cliff. So they've fallen to levels not seen since the 1970s. And that decrease is quite dramatic, as you can see. Moreover, the falling numbers of new arrivals into this population began well before, or just before, the Great Recession, which provides strong evidence that it's not tied to this trend is not tied to the recession, and it provides some evidence that the numbers aren't necessarily going to rebound that arrivals are going to increase substantially with an improved economy either. As further evidence of a long-term stable population, the length of U.S. unauthorized residence has increased dramatically over those 13 years, from 26% who were here 10 years or more in the year 2000 to 60% who were here 10 years or more in 2013. And this percentage is actually going to continue to rise. In other words, what we're looking at are people who have made their lives here and they're not going anywhere. One statistic that was particularly interesting to me is that nearly 2 million, 1.9 million unauthorized residents have now been in the United States for 20 years or more. It's pretty remarkable. Because arrivals from states with heavy percentages of border crossers is diminished, particularly Mexico, new additions to the unauthorized population are now mostly coming from people who overstay temporary visas. So look at that. Look at how that's reversed. Right now, it's about 60% are visa overstayers who are new arrivals into the unauthorized population. I think what that trend provides is further evidence of the misalignment between funding for border enforcement. We now spend $18 billion a year to secure the border, and yet most people are not coming across the border anymore. So, in conclusion, I think that you can find the article that summarizes some of these and other trends. It's the second article there, and then Bob's article on development of the data set and the estimates is the first article. The U.S. has basically taken border control as far as it will go in reducing the unauthorized population. You have a relatively stable, long-tenured population, so conditions are ripe for broad reform, including a legalization program and reform of the underlying legal immigration system. I think one other recommendation that we had for Congress is to update the registry date in the Immigration and Nationality Act. And registry, for those who don't know it, has been part of immigration law since the 1920s, pretty much since we've had a legal immigration system. And what it does is it allows for very long-term unauthorized residents. And I'll go back to a more interesting slide so you can look at it while I'm making this pitch. But it allows for very long-term unauthorized residents with good moral character to become lawful permanent residents. And the registry cutoff date was last advanced during the Immigration Reform and Control Act, and it was advanced to January 1st, 1972. So if you arrived prior to January 1st, 1972, that's 43 years ago, you'd be eligible for registry. If Congress advanced the cutoff date to January 1st, 2000, as we've seen, 50% of the unauthorized would qualify. So this is something that I think has been regarded as a proposal that doesn't have legislative legs, but it would be a very, very important proposal given the composition of the unauthorized right now. And we had an event here in New York on DACA and DAPA implementation a few weeks ago, and the keynote speaker actually proposed a rolling registry, that is, moving the date up by 1 year each year and allowing people who have been here for just 7 years to register. Now that's really going nowhere, but nonetheless, more and more people are starting to see that this would fix the problem of long-term unauthorized residents and their lack of status. So let me turn it to Tara now. Is that right? To go pause for
Yes.
some questions? Okay.
Yes, we thought we would take a short break here and entertain any questions about the methodology, the way in which these the data has been derived before Rachel gives us a tutorial on how to use the tool itself. So if I think that Harmony will probably unmute the line and people can speak up with any questions. You're also welcome to type a question into the chat function and I can pose it. And while you're all gearing up to ask your questions, I thought
the
I would
conference has been unmuted.
Ask the obvious question to our CMS team, which is, will you be updating this data as often as the new information becomes available from the American Community Survey? So for example, will it be updated on an annual basis as you are able to access that updated information?
Well, I'll take that question. The methodology has been set up in such a way that within about a month or 6 weeks after the Census Bureau releases the public use data, we can have new estimates. And as long as, it's kind of interesting, if Congress were to pass a real legalization program and legalize 8 million people, we might not be able to make these estimates anymore because of the way we do it. But as long as there's not a major change in the law, we will be making these estimates off into the future.
Great, okay. And then the other question I had was, I think that either Don or Bob, one of you said that you believe that your estimates have at least 90% accuracy. Could you just say another sentence or two about how you came to that assessment and just more about how valuable that 90% figure is?
I'll take that one too. Well, based on the way we did the estimates and the way we took out the legal non-citizens, we ended up with a database that we are confident that has between 90 and 93% unauthorized. Sorry, and that's comparable to the estimates that have been made in the past, the residual estimates. And the main thing to remember, I think, about this database is that even though it's not perfect, it's well advanced beyond anything that we've had before, and we think that it accurately reflects the unauthorized population.
Great. All right. Anyone on the line like to pose a question? If you've muted yourself, you can unmute yourself, and I think that Harmony has done a global unmute. If not, we can jump into the presentation. I'll give you one more chance. All right. Rachel, why don't you go ahead and provide the presentation on using the data tool.
The conference has been muted.
So, I will now bring us to the Internet to show everyone the demo of the data tools provided by the Center for Migration Studies. So there are two main ways to access the data tools. You can directly access them by going to data.cmsny.org, or you can go to our main website, cmsny.org, and head to Research Projects, Democratizing Data, and then U.S. unauthorized data tools. Using the tools is pretty simple and straightforward. When you first visit data.cmsny.org, you will be taken to the state map. If no states are selected, you can obtain national estimates and characteristics by simply scrolling down. The characteristics that we have included are continent, region of origin, top 25 countries of origin, period of entry, years in the United States, entered prior to 2010, language spoken at home, ability to speak English, school enrollment, educational attainment, marital status, age, sex, access to a computer or the internet, poverty status, employment status, occupation, health insurance coverage, and race by ethnicity. Now, to obtain state estimates, you just simply click on a specific state. You can also select multiple states by clicking on them or dragging your cursor around the map. If you select multiple states, the data tool will aggregate the estimates for those states. Once you obtain the results you need, you can download them to either an Excel or Word file by clicking the appropriate icons located below the map. And that's how the Word document would look like. Use our computer issues. And you can then just save the downloaded file to your local computer. Now we also provide a tool that searches the PUMAs, which again are public use microdata areas. They are specialized geography created by the U.S. Census Bureau with a minimum population of 100,000. For many areas, this allows users to find estimates and characteristics of populations for certain cities, counties, and other smaller regions. As you hover your cursor over a PUMA, you'll see the descriptive name of the area. To zoom in on an area on the map, you can double-click on the area. Or if you have a mouse with a scrolling wheel, you can scroll into a PUMA area as well as out. Like the state data tool, the PUMA data tool allows you to select individual PUMAs or multiple PUMAs. And again, you can select multiple PUMAs by dragging your cursor around the map. However, in the PUMA tool, you can also search for an area by entering the name of the locality into the search bar titled Find a City or Town. Here I will put in New York City. And the tool will automatically zoom to and highlight the area you have entered. Additionally, the tool will provide descriptions of each of the PUMAs highlighted in the results for the following PUMAs below the map. So you will see all the different PUMAs that were selected that fall under New York City. Note again that if multiple PUMAs are selected, the data tool will aggregate the estimates. To zoom back out to see the entire map, you can click Full Map, which is above the map itself. And to deselect all the highlighted areas, you can click Clear. Again, just like the state tool, once you've selected the areas for which you require information, simply scroll down the page for the estimates and characteristics provided for those areas, or download the Excel or Word file and save again to your computer. And that's it. And I'll now turn the discussion over to Dawn on next steps.
Thank you, Rachel. So we have in terms of the application of what we have a treasure trove of data that we'd like to make available to benefit users of the kind that we've described without having the data misused. And we can't ourselves anticipate, of course, all the ways that credible researchers and academics and government officials and policymakers will want to use the microdata. And that's what's exciting about the project, I think, is it's this extraordinary tool, and it's almost impossible to predict how it will be used by credible researchers and others. But we have been in conversation already with people like Professor Tom Long, the Congressional Research Service, scholars from the RAND Corporation, and many others on making it available to them to allow them to do their own research based on this tool. We also have been thinking about running estimates on the unauthorized. And by the way, we can also run estimates on legal non-citizens as well. And doing reports that compare the estimates on the unauthorized to, for example, where charitable legal capacity exists. You know, we know a lot more about charitable legal immigration programs, the groups that they serve, the languages that their staff speaks, the geographic reach of their services, you know, than we've ever known before. And you can imagine a report that matched data on the unauthorized, where they are, languages spoken, education levels, and those kinds of things, with data on where charitable capacity exists. Or we could do the same for English as a second language providers, for example, or community organizing groups. And all of this would be extremely useful in terms of implementation of a large legalization program. We could also, in fact, we already have produced tabulations which we think will be useful for consular offices and for UN missions on their unauthorized nationals in the United States. So if they want to reach out to them, if they want to provide them with documents, if they want to do outreach for them, provide them legal support in a legalization type of program, DACA or DAPA, they can do that based on the information that we provide to them. We could also, with this tool, provide highly detailed reports on the likely naturalization eligible, and we could do that at a level of geographic specificity and a level of detail on their characteristics that's been impossible before. Or you could compare where notario complaints are made and where notario prosecutions occur, and this is a data set that we've been looking into actually, or where unpaid wage claims take place with the unauthorized population, and again, their characteristics. All this, I think, would be a lot of work, but we think that the payoff is fairly obvious. And again, we really see ourselves kind of as being at an inflection point in the program. We have a terrific tool, and the challenge now is how to best to use it and to allow others to use it as well. And I also wanted to say that I hope that it's helpful to the philanthropic community and to funders as well. I can think of a lot of ways that it might be in terms of crafting particular programs and strategic approaches to service and to empowerment of the unauthorized and to other non-citizens. So let me stop there and go to, I think we're going to go to questions again.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Don, Bob, and Rachel for the presentations. And we will now open the line again to all of you to ask your questions.
The conference has been unmuted.
To ask your questions orally or to type a question into the chat function if you prefer. And whoever's phone is ringing, maybe you could put yourself on mute.
Are you back home?
Any questions?
No.
Noemi, do you have a question?
Spend some time with.
Hi, yes. I was just curious about the detailed reports that they were just talking about. Is that something we would order, or are you saying that's something that we could actually get ourselves based on the information that's available at CMS?
The published report that gives all of the detail of the methodology is published in the Journal on Migration and Human Security. You can find that at the CMS website.
And for reports of the type that Don just detailed that are possible related to legal services or ESL or naturalization, those are the kinds of things that are possible but not yet available or not yet published. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And they would take it off because what you'd be doing is you'd be comparing the CMS estimates with other data, with other information. So it'd be a fairly involved process to produce them. But for example, I've got a charitable legal immigration background. We would have loved on a lot of the large projects over the years to have very detailed reports that could give you things like availability of computers or poverty level or languages spoken in a household or whatever for various populations at this level of geographic specificity. In other words, it would have helped us an awful lot in terms of targeting outreach and providing services and trying to build programs in particular places. So that's the kind of thing that in the back of our minds we're thinking of.
And so would it be helpful to your team then, Don, if funders or NGOs have a wish list of those types of reports? Should they send those ideas and requests to you so that you can think about future reporting based on those? Or is there some way to help you prioritize how you think about prioritizing these kinds of products in the future?
I think it'd be a lot of help to us if people were to do that. We really regard this as kind of the next. There's two parts to the next phase of this process. Getting the web tool up and going has been a large labor, and it's a very, very important step. But actually figuring out a way to provide the microdata to credible researchers, scholars, policymakers, and the like, that's kind of right before us right now, and we're thinking about how to do that as we speak. And then the second part, the next step here, is to actually start producing reports that people need that go beyond the web tool of the kind that I was outlining. And we can't even at this point anticipate what those might be, so it would be very, very helpful to us if people could start to think about that and let us know.
Great. So people should let you know what their wish lists are, but recognize that there may be a need for resources and time to help you prepare them off into the future. I have one question. Okay, great. Thank you. One question from Sandra Dunn that came in the chat box. You mentioned that the dramatic drop in Mexican immigration in the past few years shows that immigration is not completely bound up with economic downturns, et cetera. What do you think accounts for the drop in Mexican immigration?
Well, Bob, I don't know if you want to answer this, but I have my own thoughts, but go ahead.
Well, one thing to notice on that chart is that the drop really started not much after the year 2000, and it dropped pretty steadily after that. I think and Don can, I hope, will throw in his own ideas on this, but obviously if you keep doubling the Border Patrol every few years, that will have an effect. But others have pointed out that the birth rate in Mexico continues to drop. The economy in Mexico has been improving somewhat. And those are the things I've heard from other people, but I don't have any original research on this myself.
Yeah, we don't. Our data doesn't show that, but that is what the studies by Doug Massey and others do show. It's a function of reduced childbirths, improved economic prospects in Mexico, and other factors. The other point that I wanted to make, which I didn't, and this comes from other research as well, is that it's quite clear that who's coming now from Mexico and from Central America are people that have family ties in the United States, whether they're children or whether they're people that have been deported. The percentages of people that are coming for, maybe they're driven by violence or other conditions or poverty, but they're coming to the United States because of family here is extraordinarily high.
Okay. Any other questions from participants on the phone? Go ahead. Someone start to speak? We lost you if you did. All right. Have you heard any feedback on the search tool from folks that have had any trouble navigating it, or it looks to be very simple and generate very detailed information, but have you learned anything in the rollout to date that people should know, any tips or tricks to using this?
Well, there was one. Everyone who's provided their feedback has been very complimentary and have told us that it's been very useful for their own research and their own work. But we did have one request on New York City area, and it turns out that some of the, if you're trying to select, for instance, only Manhattan Pumas, those were 3 districts weren't coming up, and we've fixed this. I informed Indiana University, which has a control on that, and so they were able to pull up the data and provide it to that person. And so for other instances that people come across, they can of course just contact us, and we will sort it out for them and fix whatever else might be observed.
Great, thank you. We will try not to overwhelm you, but that's great to know. Any other questions from participants on the line? Or maybe I could throw it out to other funders who may have already tried to use the data tool. Have any of you used it yet and shared any of the data with grantees, or used it in other ways that might be helpful for your colleagues to hear about? I was thinking, for example, as GSER is working with DACA and DAPA collaboratives around the country, some of which have been in existence since 2002, but we're seeing some efforts to start new collaboratives. And so I was just thinking, as Rachel was running through the presentation, how valuable it would be to a funder collaborative information to look at the state or geographic area in which they're working and start their collaborative planning with all of this information in hand, rather than I think what most of the collaboratives did, which was start with either some data or a lot of guesswork as they launched their efforts 2-3 years ago. So for anyone who is embarking on this work for the first time, we hope that you will make good use of this database in your planning.
You know, if I might, Tara, just say that I think that that's the way that we hope that it's worked, that it's useful to people. And we, in my experience, programs always knew kind of who they were serving, of course, but who they didn't know is what they didn't know is who they weren't serving. And my guess is that people are really going to be surprised by the different pockets of unauthorized people that are within their areas that they're not reaching out to. So I think it's, you know, for that reason will be an eye opener and a useful product for funders and for service providers.
I think that's right. I mean, even in a large geographic area like Southern Illinois, we have some information, but we also know that the population is changing in some ways rapidly. For example, as meatpacking companies have moved away from hiring mostly undocumented immigrants to hiring mostly documented immigrants, we've seen some changes in the makeup of the population, and I think with this data being updated as often as it will be, that will be an extremely valuable source for people planning both in the highly populated urban areas, but also in sparsely populated, more rural and isolated areas. Any other questions from participants on the line? If not, we can wrap up early. I'll ramble for a moment in case anybody does want to jump in. But we had planned for 90 minutes for this. We do have time if people do have questions. But I do want to point your attention to the last. There are a handful of slides remaining here that just provide some useful background information for you on the American Community Survey, a bit more information on the logical edits and citations to articles, and then some information on all of the people that have contributed to this effort. And we want to thank all of them, not just Don, Bob, and Rachel on the call, but the other members of the team that they have assembled over the last couple of years. And if there are no other questions, I think that we can conclude. The CMS team has kindly offered to take your suggestions for future research projects and reporting projects that might be of value to you and your grantees or that could advance the field. I think we, depending on how many of those and the scope of them, as funders we should think about how to help CMS produce them over time. But in the short term, by all means, share your ideas and thoughts with them. If you do have any trouble navigating the tool, by all means let them know, and they can provide some helpful guidance. Or if there are specialized searches you need help with, you can reach out probably to Rachel for those.
Yes,
and
please feel free to email us at cms@cmsny.org.
And maybe say that one more time.
It's cms@cmsny.org.
Great, thank you. And with that, we want to thank all of you for joining us today. We want to thank GSER for organizing and handling the logistics for this webinar and doing the superb job that they always do. Thanks CMS for doing this work, for producing these tools and making them so easily navigable and widely available so that we and all of our grantees and others can use them, put them to good use. And then we want to encourage everyone to complete the survey. You can see the link to it there on your screen. This really helps GSER and all of us plan to make sure that these webinars are as helpful to all of you as they can be. This webinar has been taped and will be available on the GSER website. So if you want to revisit it or share it with others, please feel welcome to do that, and that will be posted shortly. And if there are no other questions or comments, I think that we can sign off early. Many thanks to everyone for joining.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Take care.